Joshua,
Yes, God?
Joshua, my servant Moses is dead.
What was that?
While the first chapter of Joshua is studied often, there's one major point that seems to be glossed over frequently.
Joshua, be strong, confident, and courageous.
Most everyone knows the name of Moses, and most people can list at least a few key details of his life, such as he was pulled out of a river as a baby, he talked to a burning bush, he performed miracles in front of Egypt's Pharaoh demanding that
let my people go.
He led the Israelites out of slavery, parted the sea, made water come from rocks, wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and get this. In later years, he had to wear a veil over his face because he spent so much time in the physical presence of God that his face glowed. I mean, here we are, thousands of years later, and people are still naming their kids after him. He is justifiably considered one of the greatest prophets and teachers of all time, and there are relatively few cultures, even today, that aren't substantially impacted by the life of Moses.
Joshua, you're in charge of leading my people now. It'll be a lot of work with a lot of battles.
In Numbers chapter 27, verses 15 to 23, we read that God hand-selected Joshua to be Moses' successor.
Pick your dynasty.
And in Deuteronomy 34, we read about Moses' death. Side note, God personally buried Moses. How many people can claim that? But I digress. Everybody dies sooner or later, and when Moses passed, Joshua was next in line. Let me ask you a question. Do you know the name of the governor of your state? Or if you live outside of the US, do you know who leads your people group? Most people say yes to that question. Here's another one. Do you know who is next in line behind them? Do you know the name of the person who is second in command? Most people don't. Who is the second person to step on the moon? Who is the second president of these United States of America? President Putin is currently leading Russia. Who's next in line behind him? Who is next in line behind China's Xi Jinping? We have the benefit of looking backwards in time and seeing Joshua after his leadership ended. We can read of his great accomplishments, especially in battle. He is one of the greatest military leaders in history, with victory after victory after victory. And he led the Israelites into the Promised Land. For him, though, at that moment, God showed up, and we read in chapter 1, verse 5, he promised to be present with Joshua, just as he was present with Moses.
Joshua, be strong and very courageous. There are a lot of commandments, laws, and rules that you will need to follow and enforce.
In most parts of the world, nowadays, we have government leaders and we have spiritual leaders. They're separate roles, and each has a heavy burden to carry, if it's done right. Because those leaders aren't just making decisions for themselves. They're making decisions that will impact all of those living under their authority or power. While Joshua wasn't Israel's high priest, he was very much a spiritual leader for Israel in addition to being their governmental leader. So in essence, he carried the burden of both positions.
Joshua, I have commanded you, be strong and courageous.
Starting in Numbers 13, we read that Joshua was one of the 2 spies in investigating the Promised Land years earlier. At that time, he wasn't even able to sway the other spies or the other military leaders. He certainly wasn't able to sway the general population. Now here he is, stepping into the top-level position to lead the entire nation.
Do not be terrified or intimidated. I will be with you.
I wonder about his thoughts that day. Was he anxious to start a new job? Was he apprehensive stepping into Moses' shoes? Was he eager to prove his value to God? Was he wanting to gloat to all those who wouldn't believe in him before? Was his warrior side battling with his faithful servant side? In all of us, there are times in which we long to be tested. We want to be pushed out of our comfort zone and into something new, with new challenges and new experiences, because... But in contrast, there are also times in which we question ourselves. We start to think that if the people around us really knew, they would... If Joshua's confidence was put on a scale against his imposter syndrome, I wonder which side was tilting the balance that day. I know I would struggle with it. Well, I do struggle with it. Even now, making this video, there are thoughts piling up on the scales. Some voices say that I'm wasting my time. Some ask, who am I to publicly discuss God's word? Other voices say that God's word never returns void, and if I don't discuss God's word, the rocks will cry out. All of creation speaks to God's word. Is my voice worth less than someone else's?
You must run and hide.
Is it worth more than someone else's?
I am the king!
I heard once that there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. There's also a fine line between humility and self-debasement. There are countless examples in today's politics where people are simultaneously defined as confident and arrogant depending on who you ask. Similarly, I can think of people who continuously degrade themselves, claiming it's humility. In any case, God selected Joshua for the role, and, well, Joshua, being a faithful servant, he followed. If you're a leader, who are you following? Perhaps you're a leader at work, following a supervisor. Perhaps you're the supervisor, following someone higher up. Perhaps you're at the top, following shareholders or customers. Perhaps you're a leader in your family, or a leader amongst friends. Whoever you are, if you look around carefully enough, there's probably someone following you, and there's probably somebody you should be following. There are probably also far too many people trying to lead you when they shouldn't.
Follow me! I know the way!
I'm picturing all the people stepping up to Joshua that day with false praise or false criticism, using manipulative words to sway his decisions. I'm sure there were people attempting to bend his ear, to guide his eyes. There were certainly some trying to lead him rather than follow him. Think of all the people trying to influence your decisions right now. Friends and family, church leaders, commercial marketing, politicians, celebrities, mass media, TV shows and movies, social media influencers, and a lot of others. Full disclosure, I'm one of them. While influencing or being influenced isn't necessarily a bad thing, ask yourself, is that influence leading you the right way or the wrong way?
Which was my way?
Which way do you want to go?
Which way would you go?
Me?
Yes, which one?
Is it helping you to grow as a person, or is it making you a weaker leader? It's always important, especially in times like that, to focus our attention on how God views us. How does God see us as an individual? What is God saying to us and about us? In the case of Joshua, God believed in him and believed he could handle the job. God's guidance for Joshua wasn't about networking. It wasn't about motivating others. It wasn't about being more productive or thinking strategically. The guidance includes do everything in accordance with the law of Moses, which was the entirety of the Bible at that point. Do not deviate from God's written word in either direction. Don't just talk the talk. Meditate on it continuously so you can walk the walk. In other words, know God's word, but don't just preach it, live it. Embed it in yourself so deeply that when influencers arise, you can put God's will in the scale to weigh against the influencer's will. Then you can
Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go.
God talks to us through his word, and through his word, we know that he talks to us in other ways as well. Would you like to know more about how God talks to us? If so, watch this video next.